Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back, or maybe just welcome. I'm Abdulwab, software developer with X plus Y experience, filling the X and filling the Y, or maybe calculate it however you can. So disclaimer: I'm making this video for a friend, so I won't be quoting any articles, or maybe there was no crazy prior research done. I'm just trying to explain some things, but I decided to just make it into a YouTube video. So what we're talking about today is just how do you structure your APIs? Not going so in depth. So I just want to talk about the URLs and the responses. Maybe not necessarily status codes because it's more about how the URLs are structured and how the response actually being given. So I'm just going to get started with that. This video might take a little while, but please bear with me. You can increase the speed if you want to. So basically, you have a backend, regardless of uh, however it was built with frameworks, without frameworks, raw code, procedural approach, OOP doesn't necessarily matter. What matters is anybody that wants to consume your API has a structured and standard format that they want to follow, and it must be maintained across all the resources that your API actually gives out to the consumers, right? And the consumers in this scenario can be the front end, maybe the front end engineers implementing it. Some other websites needs the API to function, or they need to make a call to it to get some particular data. Doesn't necessarily matter. So we're just talking about the bare bones API. So API, we already know this video is not necessarily for beginners or anybody. Most people already know what API is, so I'm not necessarily going to definitions or whatnot. So let's say we have a blog. I think the typical example that you find online is called it uses blog as example. So I'm just going to use blog. So what do we have in a blog, for example? So there's a blog, right? So in a blog, we have the blog itself, which is like the website. We have posts, right? Inside the post, we have comments, and maybe in the comments we have then they also we have the users too, right? Well, for what we actually need, we know that our website is actually a blog. So let me just call it a blog website. So let's say we need to actually create API URLs where external websites or something can actually retrieve the information on our website. So what do we do? So we create, let's say our domain name is HTTPS, sorry, HTTPS like that, and it is made, let's say blog dot com. Let's say blog.com. So in a usual convention, right, if this is not a dedicated maybe backend on a particular server, let's say you call it app.blog.com or maybe api.blog.com, usually this might be the main URL of the website, right? Main URL. While your API URL might be something relating to let's call it HTTPS, sorry, so it can be blog.com blog.com slash API, for example, right? So any other resource is going to actually follow the same approach. So whatever you need, it's just going to be here. So let's go over the basics of what an API is, right? We know any API should give you the access to maybe not necessarily all APIs, but at least the general concept is you have to be able to create, read, update, delete, which is what they call CRUD operations, right? Create, read, update, and delete. So let's just put the full meaning in front of them. So we have this one delete, sorry. So this one is update, while this one is read, this one is create. Before you create something, before you are able to read, you have to create it. Once it is created, you can update it, and if you don't want it anymore, you can delete it. So this is the basic operations that you should be able to carry out on an API, all right? So we have operations. So then the next thing is, what are the verbs? So we have HTTP verbs. Usually everybody is familiar with going to the browser, putting a navigation, a URL in the browser, like going to blog.com. So when you go to your browser, the type of request you're actually sending is a GET request. But the thing is, there are multiple type of requests. But in this video, we're really just going to cover a few of them, probably almost all, because it's not like they are bunch of them anyways. So and those HTTP verbs are actually related to these four operations that I've mentioned, right? I just mentioned something called GET request, right? Typically, you get that in your browser. So any request you send in your browser URL is and you press enter key yourself. You type it manually and then you send your enter key. It's a GET request by default. So let's say I wanted to go to our blog website, just like I said above right here. So this is a GET request. So this is a GET request to load the website in the browser. So, but this does not necessarily mean that it is only the browsers that can send GET requests. We also have HTTP clients. The browser is also an HTTP client at the end of the day, right? So, but we have dedicated HTTP clients, just like your Postman, your Thunder client, and Insomnia, and whichever your favorite is, right? So, but what are the other HTTP verbs that we actually need? If you have worked with HTML, the basic form, like totally basic form without all the bells and whistles of the Vue, React, Angular frameworks, you would have come across where you had to maybe create a form, right? And then you have to specify the method, especially when submitting a form, right? And most times, what do you see? You see something called post request. So usually in your form in HTML, it can either be a get or a post, right? Or post. What are the other ones? So this allows you to make a request to fetch a resource. Post is you're sending something to the server, maybe not necessarily read. Even though regardless of whatever HTTP verb is being used, you can actually make the same request. So let's say I wanted to actually, as long as I'm using an API client, an HTTP client, right? I can actually send a post request to get the content of the page. But the reason why we are here is not for you to use one single HTTP verb and one single endpoint to send every single thing possible, which is actually very possible. You can decide to use the same endpoint and the same verb to do all the series of actions that you want to. You probably can use a GET request and start appending parameters to it to get what you need done, even if you need a delete operation. Very, very possible. So my API can be structured in such a way that I can append query strings like this, and maybe select the action type. Like I said, it's a create, read, update, and delete. But this is not what we want to do here. I just want to try to establish a standard, right? Not necessarily something new. It's more like accepted and generally used, and the conventional way of doing it, and it makes sense to do. Mostly, you want to write your URLs and your requests in such a way that anybody reading your documentation without actual the developer of the API writing the full text of what your API is, they should be able to tell what that resource is actually used for. So we are going to go over it. So the HTTP files we'll be talking about today is get posts. Then we have put or patch. They are two different things, but for this tutorial that we're focusing on, we'll just say put for now and just leave patch out of it. We have delete, right? So we have the get request, the post request, the put request, and the delete request, right? So we also have options and some other ones too. So if you want to create something, you're going to use a post request. Like I just said, the similarity with HTTP forms, HTML forms. When you put your post request here and you submit it, it actually does a post request. So you're creating the resource. When you need to read the resource, what do? You do a get request, right? So when you want to update, you do a post request, and when you want to delete, what do? You send a delete request. But you can't do these guys in HTML. HTML forms only support a get request and a post request. If you use some frameworks, there are ways of injecting what the method is supposed to be. For example, in Laravel, you can actually do a method like this. If you are using HTML, you call a method function and then you specify the actual method of the form. So what it does is actually it's an hidden field which actually specifies what the method type is supposed to be. So we'll come back to that. So let's move to the next thing. We're talking about what do we need to do? So the first thing to make your blog an actual blog is to create posts, right? So we need posts. So we need posts. So what do we need to create a post, right? What do we need to have post on the website? We need to be able to create posts, right? So if you are using the interface, you're going to go to the admin dashboard, click on create post, submit to fill up a form with all the required details, and then you submit it and life goes on and you're good to go. But let's say you are giving access via API for someone to be able to create those posts for you. So what you would need is what you're going to need. So the operation here is create, and then the verb http verb that is needed here is what now. So there's the post request, right? So it's a post request. So but then when you're sending a post request, what do you need? You need to actually pass the body. So the body is actually the contents for that URL for the post itself in this scenario. And this body can be in various formats. You can check up on what content type is later. So content types, like if you want to send files, you want to send actual JSON object and the likes. For this scenario, we'll actually be using JSON because we are talking about APIs and the response format is in JSON. So I guess we will be more used to that. For scenarios whereby our post needs to take images, we'll be using something like form data or maybe encode or what's it called? We'll be using something like form data so that it can accept images. If you not just images, it can accept files in general. So if you remember from your HTML, you have something called enc type, right? You put multi-part form data there so that it can accept multiple items, especially files in this scenario. So for what we want to do here, I'm just going to assume that the body is just JSON because the purpose of this video is to actually look at what we actually return and what the URL structure is like. I'm not particular about what the input is or maybe the key value pairs of the output, but we'll get to it. So to create a post, what do I need? So the input that I need the name, in this scenario, I need let's say the title, right? The title, the content, and then what else do I need? I think at the same time we're going to need an image, right? So when I'm sending this request, I also need the URL. So what URL am I going to make this request to? So request URL or request slash API URL. So if you remember the other time, API, sorry. If you remember the other time, we said our API URL has this base, right? So if I wanted to create a post, I'm going to come here and then I'm going to call the resource because our resource name is post. So you need to actually decide what the resource name is going to be called. So in this scenario, our resource name is called post, right? Our resource name is called post. So our resource name is called post, but when you're building API, since for example, you want to actually name them in the plural form when structuring your API. The reason is that for readability sake, a disclaimer to actually throw out there is nothing is really a standard until a group of people have actually accepted it to be a standard. So, no, there's no one way to the solution. There are multiple routes to achieve the same thing, right? So let's say you wanted to pull posts. It makes sense that your API says posts, that you're getting posts rather than you're getting posts, right? So we'll come back to that and the reason why it's like that. So we want to create before we can even read in the first place, right? So like I said, we have posts. So if you have agreed that your resource name is post, make it a plural form called posts. So I'm going to be sending a request to this post URL. So it's a post, I'm sending a post verb, right? Request with this object to this URL, which is going to give me a request. So our request is going to look like this. So our request URL is like this. Then so when we get a response, so we are now building our API, right? We have the request and then we have the response. So our response, what's our response going to look like? This is actually the main part that caused me to record this particular video, right? So I have this, Then with JSON, right? Curly braces as usual. We're going to build out the structure of this property. So first thing is, how do I actually get the data back that was actually created? So I created something. What tells me that, oh, this data was created? So let's say we get a message that says that the post was successful. So post created successfully. So this might be enough in some scenarios, right? The post was created. You don't necessarily have to maybe get the full ID. In some scenarios, it works. But just so we follow standard conventions, you create the post, you should be able to get it back. The reason why you want to get it back is so that you can get the ID of the post itself. You can maybe say, oh, why not just return the ID of the post like this and return the ID of the post directly here? Does it always work like that? We want to build a standard structure, you remember? Or maybe I call it post ID. The name is not even of importance right here. I'm just going to go straight to what I want to do with this so that we don't have to beat around the bush. So it makes sense that you call it, declare a data property. This data property is going to contain the data that was actually created. So in this scenario, you can have the ID that you wanted, so which is the post ID in this scenario, right? And then you have the rest of what you actually need, which is the content and the images, right? So we'll just do that here. Sorry. So we have the post title. So this one post title. Why am I skipping the T? Then the contents, which is lorem ipsum, whatever you need it to be, lorem ipsum. And then the image. The image is probably going to be a URL, right? URL to image. So extra information also can be the created as field when it was actually created, which is actually going to be a date. You can see. So we're kind of getting there, right? So this is our response. Also, as we have HTTP verbs, we also have HTTP status codes, right? HTTP status codes ranges from 100 all the way to like 500 plus. So, and those different ranges, they have different meaning. If you are within the range of 200, you it means you are good to go, right? Whatever operation you did was successful. So either you inserted or you fetched. But generally, what you're going to see mostly is 200. But in this scenario, maybe 201. Something was created, right? So we're just going to stick to 200x range for this purpose. Like I said, this is a standard. If you wanted to, you could maybe return a 400, but a 400 by standard has been declared as something that failed, a 400 plus that failed. So the user sent an input, but the server processed it, and oh, it said that oh, based on the inputs provided by the user, it actually failed. The request was unsuccessful. A 500 range plus of error means there's something wrong on the server itself. So maybe you're having permission issue with your server, maybe something was not able to create, maybe it was a database error. It's going to throw a 500 server error message back, right? But if it was you wanted to create a post request and then you sent title and sent image, but you did not add the content, that's going to be in the range of 400 plus. We're going to come to that, but that is not the purpose of this video itself because that's also a long topic on its own. But just note that you have your 200, you have your 300, you have your 400, you have your 500. Or the 300, the common ones you're going to see are 301s and 302s for temporary and permanent redirects. You are probably not going to intentionally return any of those. So the ones you might want to intentionally return yourselves are in the 200 range and 400 range, which means you're handling the data and then you are responsible for sending that status itself. So when something is created, you usually send the 21 or 200 as you will see with most API responses. So that's why I said 200x. I'm not here to tell you if it's supposed to be 400 or 500, but I just mentioned it already. 201 mostly when you carry out a post request. So now that we have created a post, right? The next thing to do is how do we actually retrieve the post? Read the posts. So we want to read the posts. So our operation here, we already know what the operation is. Our operation is read, and our HTTP verb is going to be what? I think I already mentioned that already. The HTTP verb is going to be a get. So we are making a get request. So a get request does not have a body. A get request has query parameters. So rather than a body, we have query parameters. What I mean by query parameters is if you ever come across a URL where you saw the question mark with some key value pair like this. So you have your URL, url.com. So this is what is called query parameters. If you have multiple, you're going to have an and, key one, and then a value one also. So these are the multiple query parameters that we have where these are the keys and anything on the right side of the equals to is the value of that query parameter itself. So when making a post request, actually when you are structuring it out in maybe your JavaScript, you are not sending it as a body. You're supposed to be sending whatever you need to send in the GET request as the query string, or they call it just generally call it parameters. Right. But when you're sending the post, you're sending as part of the body. So how you now send it depends on what type of data you're sending. Do you need to send as a form data so they can support images? URL encoded format, there are multiple. You want to send it in JSON, all up to you. So what's our requests URL like? So we're going to come to this. So we are getting posts. So for this scenario, currently we're getting all posts. So we're getting all posts. Then our response is actually going to be what 200x. So let me just change to 201. So this is also going to be 200 because when it's successful, we are here to talk about error messages, right? We'll come to that. So when this is successful, what do we get? We don't need a message because we didn't carry out an action, right? So we need a data property. And I will tell you, you might think, oh, it's only the data that we need. Why am I returning it? Why can't I just return the array of all the posts here? And by the way, since we are getting all the posts, we are returning an array instead, not a direct update. If we're to be returning an array here, that might probably translate to you have an API endpoint that allows you to create multiple posts at once, right? For this scenario, we don't want that. So I'm just going to steal this right here, put this here, and paste. So that's what I wanted. So I'm just going to say we have multiple posts in the scenario 2, 3, 4. So let me just do this post ID. So we have our post 1, 2, 3, 4, and all their IDs updated just like we wanted them, right? So when you're returning all of this, what you get is data containing all the properties. And the reason why I'm actually adding here is because of another thing that I want to explain, which is also of great importance. I could have just removed this and returned back an array of just the posts. But let's say we have a million posts. Are you going to return a million posts all at once? No, it doesn't make sense. It means you have to deal with something called pagination. And those pagination data can pass along together with these requests, which is why structuring the API this way is important. So you already know that anything which is supposed to be the actual resource itself is going to be the data property, and extra things like maybe messages, some errors, some metadata information like for confirmation is going to be inside another property, which is why we can't just return post directly without the extra information. So let's say we have 4 here, right? So we can say we have metadata. Sorry, meta. You can just call it meta, call it metadata. Naming convention is basically up to you. You just have to follow standard, properly documented, and make sure the people consuming those APIs know that this is what is implemented. So for this, what do I need? I need the total count. Because if I'm going to do a pagination, I need to know how many properties were returned, right? So I can do a count. I can call it a count property. So in this scenario, we returned 4, right? Returned 4. So, but what is the total? Sorry, what is the total? Am I spelling that wrong? So, what is the total number of posts that we actually have in our database? Let's say it's 20. If it is 20, it means we probably returned 4 per page. So, meaning there must be a current page. So, meaning we are going to fetch it page by page, meaning we must have 5 pages in total, right? So, If I say current page, our current page is page one. The last page, this scenario, our last page is going to be what? Page five, because there's going to be four per page for 5 pages, right? So we have the current page and the last page. We know the first page is always going to be one. So this pagination data is always up to you, however you want to put it. Some people add the current URL, the next URL, and all of that information. But how are we going to actually know that we want four per page, right? Meaning that this particular URL has to take parameters, like I said, query parameters, like I mentioned earlier. So if we wanted to add query parameters, we can add limit. Like I said, this is totally up to you. So limit, I want to be able to limit what I get at once to just four, for example, right? So meaning if I get just four at once, my count is should always be four. It will tell me the total based on the count that I'm pulling. So the total in the database is 20. We are pulling four. We are currently on page one. The last page is page five. If you don't do this, the front-end developer, or maybe the person implementing the API can actually do it based on calculation just for this by doing a total divided by count. Well, if you can supply the information, it also works quite fine too. So you can have limits. You can also have other information. Maybe you want to sort by created at. So if you want to add more query parameters, you can have this. So maybe you wanted to sort. So maybe it's even sort by date. So what date do you want to sort it by, and maybe what format do you want to sort it by? We know maybe it is in descending order or ascending order. You can also add extra information that you wanted. So it's not only limited to this. So let's say if you wanted to go further to customize this URL, you can maybe add a search parameter here. So whereby this allows you to actually search through the data. So let's say I just wanted to uh, posts that actually start with post title. It means I'm going to still get this for, but you get the gist. So I mean I can add a search parameter here. So this is how search works. So when you search for post content, so search will also be implemented together with it. So now we already have the create and we have the post, right? So but let's say I actually wanted to update. So I'm going to say we want to update post. Note, so far we actually made the last two requests to the same exact URL, if you have noticed that. So I'm just going to split this so that we can see side by side. So this is our create post and this is our read post. And you can see the API is here to actually change. So let's say we made a mistake in post 4, for example. So we are going to grab it by the ID. So just to make this clear, IDs safest without spaces or white space in between them. Make sure it's just a long string that you can deal with, a simple no white space long string that you can deal with. It can also be a number, not necessarily, but that's not the point of this video. But let's just get on with it. So the next thing we're doing is to update the post, right? What operation are we carrying out? The operation that we are carrying out is update, right? Update. Then the HTTP verb being used here is what? Put. So same thing, same way post. In fact, your post is just like your post request. And if you wanted to look at it in the grand scheme of things, there are only two requests that are actually important. The two HTTP verbs that are actually important, which is the get request and the post request. Other ones like the put, patch, and delete, like I mentioned earlier, they are like posts. They function just like posts. So we need the body also, yeah. The body in this scenario can either be any of this. But the extra thing that we would like to do on Watch here, so I'm just going to copy this because it looks similar like I mentioned earlier. So I want to update a post. How do I update a post? Because if I make the request that I would just want to update the particular content of this post here, what will be my result? Which particular post out of this four is it going to update? So this is where we now change our URL for the first time. So we need to provide the ID. So how do you provide the ID? Do you go ahead and provide the ID in the request body by saying you're going to provide the post ID right here? It also works. It's a brilliant approach. So it just means that when you are writing your backend code, It's the same API, right? So, but request is what differentiates them, right? It's going to is what is going to differentiate them. So when you have a push request, what you check for is the post ID, you search for that post, and then you update the content. But like I said, the documentation on the bare bones level, looking at the URL, does not actually explain what is happening. If I saw a get request to a post, I know I'm fetching the post. If I saw a post request, I know I'm creating a post. If I saw a pull request, it doesn't make any sense because what am I updating? So the extra thing we're going to now add to this right now is what is called a post ID. So meaning our URL is not going to follow this particular format this time around. We actually add post ID. So we wanted to update post ID number 4. So we can send our request for the content and it's going to get updated. And if you wanted to see how that also works, you can do this and then also respond back that it worked, right? So post updated in this scenario, just return everything back the way it was before with the newer content. So you can see some message and then data is updated. So then we have the last guy, right? So you're updating this. So how do you now delete, right? So if you wanted to delete, it's basically similar to what we just recently did because you have to specify what's the ID of the stuff that you want to delete. So I come here, this is delete post. So this one I call it delete post, right? If you wanted to delete multiple posts, there are other ways of actually doing that. We can make our delete work in such a way that it's going to send a delete request straight up to post, but it's going to supply it with multiple IDs, right? But the delete request in itself does not take body, it just takes that particular ID. Body also works because, like I mentioned earlier, post is similar to the put patch and delete, they are similar to post request, so they act in a similar way, right? So once we want to delete a post, so let me just grab these guys, and what do we do here? Operation delete, and then same thing goes here, delete also. Sorry, that's weird. So delete, and then I'm just going to jump straight to, because there's nobody in this particular, because we want to just delete an individual post, right? So once we want to delete an individual post, the URL that we use, sorry, let me just mark that down here. The URL that we're going to use is this, and then the response we get back in this scenario also, we can put what's it called, a response 200 also, and put it right here. So post deleted. But in this scenario, what is the data they are going to return? There's no data to return in this particular scenario. You all know that's right. Or we just return an empty object, we don't need to. If you want it there, you can also do that. Right. So that is all you actually do have about creating an object, editing an object, reading it, and updating it. But that's not all that we are here to do today. We want to explore extra options that we want to do. So we already know that a post is also going to have what? A post is going to have comments. So how do you deal with comments? Because we need to create these same operations for the comment section too. So we have the comments operations. If you get where the gist is going with what we just did here, so I'm targeting a particular post. So meaning our base URL for this particular operation is going to be what? Slash comments. Right. So I have the post, I have the post ID, and then I have the comments. So if I was to write this, making it dynamic, so I'm going to have the post ID right here with the comments. So we'll just do a quick walkthrough of it. So we have the create, we have the delete, we have the updates. So once I want to create, what do? I create with the URL. If I wanted to read the comments on the post, so this is read comments. So what do we need? We're going to read the comments, we're going to do a get request, let's request, so excuse me, to read all comments on a post, right? And this is post request to what? Create comments on a post. So if you also wanted to update, what do? Just do this and then you put the what comment ID. And if you also wanted to delete, what you send a delete request and delete the particular comment. The reason why this makes sense and this works very well is once you have a comment, you can actually easily do comment ID. When you click on delete, for example, let's say you wanted to delete a comment on a post. Why should you be able to just fire ID ordinary since a comment has unique since all comments have unique IDs, right? But it's possible that you were viewing the wrong page or maybe the wrong comments were loaded for a post when the action was carried out. So in order to prevent stuff like that, you can put the post ID from here. So meaning in your backend, you can read this post and read this comment ID at the same time. So meaning when you check the comment, you have to check that it belongs to this post before this particular resource can be deleted. So if I put post 1 and put comment 4, which belongs to post 4, this URL should return an error object back to me because it failed to match up together with that resource. This is why you can actually nest this. So for an external user or a consumer of our API, what they see at first glance, if they see just these four URLs, at first glance you can quickly tell that, oh, if I send a get request to this, I'm going to get the comments on this particular post. If I send a post request to it, I'm going to create comments. And then if I append the ID of the comment to it, I can do stuff like update it and I can do stuff like delete it. Right. Same thing applies just like what we have done. Right. So let's say we also wanted to add extra functionalities to your comments, for example. Your comments. So let's say you wanted to see the number of retweets, the number of likes, number of sub comments under it. So how do we fetch comments that belongs to a another comment? In this scenario, we're going to do something maybe that is not necessarily ideal. So let's say we have sub comments as a model on its own. It makes sense that our URL is going to also come in this particular format, right? Where you have the post ID, the comment ID, and then you have the sub comment at this point, right? So, but we will not talk about how it's best to implement this, just like Twitter tweets, threads, retweets, and the likes. This is not the video to actually experiment with all of that. But you get the gist of it. So you have the posts, comment identifier also. If you wanted to target a particular sub comment, you can put a sub comment ID. So that doesn't change what kind of object you are sending to it at at any random time. So why do we actually do this? Because you can as well just say that, oh, the other ways to actually do this, I can say post slash comment, right? Or I can even do a URL like this, post comment, or I can just do comments in general. So, but like I said, this is just a standard and not one single way is the solution. There are multiple solutions out there. Whichever works for you, for your company, document it, let everybody be aware that this is how it looks like, and don't break the data structure after a few changes has been made to the database. And then this particular tutorial doesn't touch on what's it called? Doesn't actually touch on errors. Errors. Okay, we'll come back to errors. What I wanted to say is this particular tutorial doesn't necessarily touch on. So we'll just quickly demo what errors are supposed to look like and how to handle them properly. Right. So an error object. We already explained why we actually need key value pair in responses like this. When you have the message and you also have the data and also have meta properties. It is also good that you have something like this. In case where you have errors, you can have your message. Let's say you were trying to create a sub comment, right? And for some reason the content actually failed. So meaning you made a request to a particular URL For example, you were trying to create a particular comment on a particular post. I'm just going to copy this URL as our sample. So I'm trying to make a post request to create this, and then I got a message. Content, content cannot be less than 3 words, for example. Or maybe content field is required. So we're going to go with those different scenarios. It also makes sense that we target which particular field. So in the case where we have multiple fields in action, so let's say we have, sorry, that's a typo. So let's say we have title of the comments, and then we have a content, just like a blog post, right? So it's possible that the content wasn't enough, so can be more than 3 words. So one thing you can also do is for proper rendering and proper UX and visuals on the front end, it makes sense to actually create an object that you can allow the consumers of the API easily track what field actually has the issue. And how you can do that is to create maybe an errors object or maybe error. Like I said, namings, standards, totally up to you. Just create a proper documentation that everybody is supposed to follow. And then you create this. So where you can have a key value pair of those fields. In this particular scenario, content is the one that has issues, right? So since content has issues and the issues that they have, I'm just going to grab this one, put it as an array. This is a suggestion, right? But this suggestion that I'm actually giving is based on me using frameworks over the years. And some of these frameworks already standardized to what some of these outputs are supposed to look like. Kudos to Laravel for some of these structures because I used it for multiple years and they have a fantastic way of actually handling API calls, requests, and responses. So what you do here is just give all the different type of errors. So let's say in another type of error, you have it is required field. So you can have something like this: content is required. Content is required. So or maybe let's say it's required. Okay, sorry, it's required. If the person submitted without filling any of title or content, what you can have this scenario is content and then at the same time you're going to have title. So title field is required. So this way, anybody passing this can always read the errors and look for the keys that are here which represent those actual inputs that were sent and read all the errors that were there. So in case of multiple errors, what we basically just do is title is required. Sorry, that was weird. Or title should should be a minimum of 3 characters in this scenario. So meaning on the front end for our UI purposes, the front end developer can render these errors on the title input field directly. So this is easy to note. So these are validation errors. I think you are probably familiar with 422 validation errors, 400 also bad requests. Then we have a 401 authentication request or issue too. So there are different versions of them. You can check up HTTP status code. I think Wikipedia even does a very best job, just stabilizes every single thing with the code and then the descriptions in front of it, which is also very helpful. So I think this wraps up most of it. If the 500 server error, probably get a message and tell us it's the server error anyways. So I think this covers what the request is like and what the response. The response is actually why I made this video right now. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, you can still try to thumbs up and maybe subscribe. You don't know when the next video is going to be, or whenever, or however it's going to be, or whatever format it's going to be. Thanks for taking your time. This is not supposed to have been a 40 something minutes long video, but it ended up being so. Might chop it up later.